Welcome to week 4, day 16 of the fall 2024 Programming Fundamentals with C# course. This is Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. Today, want to go over a couple things. We're going to go over the hands-on test, which is due Thursday, 9/19 by 7 a.m. So you got 48 hours to complete that. And also going to do lecture over chapter 6, which is how to code methods and event handlers. So as far as the hands-on test, just kind of a review again. I know, I think what was last week went kind of through, make sure that you follow the instructions. Like here it says, project in a single solution. So make sure you just got 2 exercises in this hands-on test, exercise 1 and 2. Make sure you read the grading portion before you start, and at the end, after you finish, just to make sure that you've covered all the areas. As far as here, following naming conventions, I guess for variable names, make sure that for variable names, make sure you just use the camel case, right? Starting with the lowercase, and then every subsequent word you'd have uppercase. So make sure you follow camel case for that. If you have any constants, just make them all uppercase. And like I said a while back ago, some of these naming conventions have kind of changed over time, but I'm not going to be really picky on it as long as you're not doing something really out of the ordinary. Just wanted to mention that. Besides that, just make sure you read each of these and make sure that you do get these. You do code this correctly based on this rubrics as far as the grading is concerned. So quick. So here we're going to have, for this first exercise, we're going to have 3 parallel arrays. So you're going to have a array called first name, last name, and phone number. Okay. Something you're going to want to do in here is whenever, so you're here, you've got 3 different boxes here. Just make sure that this isn't too confusing for everyone. This is the same application. It's just showing you entering the first name here. This is your result. If you enter the last name here, the second one over here, that's going to be your result. And then if it's not found, this is what you want to return. All right. A couple things to point out here. So obviously you've got uppercase letters here for first name and last name, and you want to go ahead and create your arrays just like it is here. But inside your code, you're going to want to make sure that when you read the text here from the text box, that you change it to lowercase, and then also change your not the exact array, but when you get the value from your array, when you're looping through your array and get the value, change that to lowercase, because you want to make sure that matches, right? And it's always easier just to make everything, you can make it uppercase or lowercase, but, usually, most people just change it to lowercase. Change it to lowercase so you can compare them, because if you have one that has an uppercase letter and the other is all lowercase, they're not going to match, right? Just pointed that out. So I'm going to show you, I don't know, I know the labs have, the parallel arrays. I don't know if anybody had a chance to do much with that yet. I'm going to show you just a quick example here. So here's an example where you've got 2 different arrays, 1 product names and 1 product categories. And here's your product names: laptop, smartphone, tablet, smartwatch, and desktop. And here's the product categories where, this is going to refer to the laptop, is going to refer to, the first one in the list is going to return to this first one. Second one here is going to refer to this one, etc. Okay. Most of them are electronics. You just have 1 wearable, which is a smartwatch, right? So here, and this is kind of more of a console app, right? You're going to be doing a WinForms app. But basically what this is doing here is you're reading the line and you're doing it to lowercase, right? So you want to convert your search term to lowercase. For you, for the WinForms app, you're going to use your text box, right? So text box to lowercase, and that would be your search term, right? And then when you do a loop, you want to make sure you use the for loop. I would suggest not using the for each loop, just because what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to be able to use the position numbers, right? That's position 0. That's position 0, right? And so you're going to have to be able to use the position numbers to know which one to grab, right? So in this case, we're looping through product names. And obviously, it's very important that, when you do these parallel arrays, they have the same name, same amount of data in it. It has to equal, like if you got 5 in one, you have to have 5 in the other so that it'll, sync up. So here you're getting product name out of your array, the first, and this at subscript, this is the I here, right? Which is going to start as a 0, and you're going to do to lower on that. So you're going to change that to lowercase, and then you're going to use this contains and use a search term. Okay. And this is the search term. In this case, it was what you entered in the console. For the WinForms app, it's going to be your text box, right? The value in your text box. So this is pretty much close to what you're going to be wanting to do also for your, for the hands-on test. It's just you're going to have another array here. So it's going to be a little bit more complex than this, but, not much more. But the things I wanted to really point out is really important to make sure you're using, basically the traditional for loop. You'll want to kind of use that. Not that there's not other ways, but it's probably going to be the simplest. So use a traditional for loop. Make sure you're using the to lower both on your search term that's coming in, and then also on the array value that you're getting out of your array. Right? You want to do to lower on that as well. And then obviously, the very important, using the contain. So that's going to say, does this contain the search term? So actually, in this situation, what would happen here is, basically you're going to, for product categories, for electronics, it should actually return 4 different ones because it's going to match on 4 different ones here. But in the case of the hands-on test, they're just 1 for 1, right? So you search on a name. You're just going to return that name and the phone number, etc. Right? So not too complicated. You might have to play with a little bit, but these are the important pieces: the for loop and the to lower and the contains. Okay. I wasn't really going to go through much of this. I don't think that there's anything here that's new in any way. You're going to prompt the user. This is going to be a console app. You're going to prompt the user for prices until they enter 0. Kind of things we've done already, right? It's just you're kind of taking it, it's just kind of becoming a little bit more complex, right? Becoming, you're having to do a little bit more than what we've done before. But it shouldn't be too bad at all. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about the hands-on test. Doesn't look bad. It's only 2 exercises. Obviously, I think the first one will take you a little more time. Okay. So the study guide for Chapter 6, How to Code Methods and Event Handlers. This is kind of going to give you a summary of the different concepts, and it should help with the test. So method return types, the type of data a method can return. So it could be any kind of data type, an int, a string, a Boolean, right? If it doesn't return anything, it's going to be void, right? So it's going to be something like this, or it's going to be void. Here's an example. This returns the sum of A and B, and you've got a return statement here because you are returning an int. So whenever you have a return type stated, you have to make sure you do a return and return that type, right? You can't be returning a string if this is an int, right? Here is basically a void return type on a method, and a lot of times, like I said earlier, when you're reason you'll want to do something with no return types is when you're just wanting to take some kind of action. Here you're just writing a line called hello world, or you might be calling something else, but you're not really looking for it to do some calculation and return that calculation, right? Access modifiers. There's other access modifiers besides just public and private, but for now, right now, we're just going to deal with those. So there's either public or private, and public is accessible from outside the class. You just kind of just remember that. We'll learn as we continue how you can access other methods from other classes from a different class, right? But for right now, just remember that public, you can be able to access that method from outside that class. Private, you only can access it within that class itself. Methods with return values. Okay, we already know that. Method parameters. Sending into two different parameters here. Width and height. You just have to make sure when you call this calculate area, you need to make sure that you have them in the correct order. If you don't have them, it doesn't know which order. It's expecting it in this order. If not, it's not going to give you the correct result. And then obviously, like we said, if you've defined this as a return type double, you need to be returning something, and the value of it needs to be a double as well. Okay. Yep. So you're passing this age, name and age. Okay. First one's a string. Second one's an int. Yep. This is a void, so nothing, no return statement. Method signatures. So here's this is showing you a single one, showing you a double one here. Nothing special that. Passing variables by value or by reference. So the key to this is if you put a ref besides it, before it, it's going to pass it by reference. And what that means is you can pass by value of reference. If you pass by value, you're basically just getting a copy of that variable, right? So if you change that variable, let's say it's an integer and you change it from a 10 to a 20, right? If you change it from a 10 to a 20, it doesn't change, and you leave that method and go back, it didn't change that, it doesn't change that value. You only change it for the scope of the area you're in, what you're doing. Like it's only going to change for that method. Once you come back, once you return, whatever the value of that integer was, it's going to stay the same. That's by value, right? Whereas if you're doing by reference, if you change the value, it's going to actually change that original variable's value. Okay. So it's showing here you're doing this increment by value, and you're passing in if you're passing in this 10, you're passing in X. You're passing in a 10. You're incrementing it. You come back, it's still going to be 10. Okay. The value of this, if you set this well, this is returning void, right? But the value of x is going to stay 10, right? Here, if you increment it by reference, you're incrementing this by reference. If you go ahead and increment this by 1, this value is now going to be 11, since you're doing it by reference and not by value. So methods can define parameters with default values, which can be omitted when calling the method. So basically you're saying string name equals guest here. And so then you can either call greet with one parameter, or you can call it with no parameters. Okay. By you doing this makes this optional. But this will be the default value. You're basically passing in a default value, and by doing this, you're actually making this optional, right? Okay, yeah, this is just showing that, this is the name, age, city, and then that's the whatever you passed in here. The string name is going to go in here. The age is going in here. The string city will be going in here when you call it, just like this. Yeah. So yeah, the point this is trying to make, sorry, I'm kind of, is basically by using city here and the colon, you can put this in any order. Here you're putting New York first, then you're putting Alice second, and you're putting age third, right? So as long as you follow this protocol here, basically you follow this, then it'll work, right? So event handlers respond to user actions like button clicks in a GUI application, right? So here's just an example of a button click, right, that we're familiar with, right? There is another way to you can also wiring an event handler. This is called wiring an event handler. We'll go into this more in detail later, but just remember, this is how you wire an event handler, okay? It would be helpful, obviously, in the test here. Expression bodied. Concise method for simple methods using a lambda expression. So yeah, always remember that when you're using that's called a lambda expression, right? And here's some tuples as return types. Tuples allow methods to return multiple values. So in this case, you're returning, since you define it like this, so you're going to be returning two things. You're going to be returning a sum and a product. Well, they're both integers, but so A plus B is going to be their sum. A times B is going to be the product. This is how you call the method. So that's just a different than a regular method where you're actually, most of the time, regular methods, you might, pass 0 or more parameters. And, if you have if you have your return type as a certain data, say an int or whatever, usually it's always going to be one thing. You're expecting one thing returned. But actually for a tuple, you actually can return more than one thing, right? You can return multiple values. It's just, this is talking about, refactoring tools. Visual Studio will give you ideas for refactoring. And here's an example of before refactoring. This is your original method, do work method. And then this is just showing you after refactoring with extracted methods. it's just showing you a different way. In a way, you've got a little more code here, but but it's a little more, proper, I guess. You're calling a method start task, then a method progress task, then a complete task. Um, so, this is what we've been kind of doing here within our Windows forms. This is a auto-generated event. When we click the button on our Visual Studio Designer, creates that button click event. But you can also this is manually wiring an event handler, and this is how you would manually do it. Um, so something, this is important for the task, so keep that in mind. All right, got that. Wanted to look at a little bit of code here. Let me get rid of this. And this is kind of a review multiple times, just kind of looking at it from different, looking at it from a document and looking for actual code here. So this is just basically a simple method, right? Don't worry about static. We'll discuss why you would be using static, but for now, just kind of ignore the whole static idea there. But basically, this is a void. So we know it doesn't return anything. This is just a regular method with no parameters, right? This is a method with optional parameters. So remember that optional parameter, when you create a default value like this is making this optional. So you can call this by, let's go look down here. Yep, optional parameter. So you can call it by just passing in the first one, or you can call it by passing in two, right? This is a named arguments, right? So you call this in any order. You can call it, if you prefix it with the name and the colon, you can have this in any order, right? Here's an expression bodied method. When we're talking about expression bodied, whenever we hear kind of expression, especially for methods, expression, think lambda expression, right? And you're always doing it like this, right? Like this is a good example of one that you can make a lot simpler than having, otherwise you'd have something like this where you would, and then in here you'd have to define, here you'd have to return like that. It just makes it a little simpler, a little shorter, right? That's the same as that one. Just a different way to write it. Yeah, I don't know if this really shows anything here helpful. Yep. And this is important, understanding pass by value and pass by reference, as we just discussed. But make sure that you remember that when you pass by value, you're passing, like you're calling this from somewhere else, right? And actually farther down in this class we're calling this. But when you call this, the value of this x that you passed in here from wherever you passed it from, it's not gonna change the value of that, right? So if you passed in 10, Here you change this to 100. It's going to write out 100, right? It's going to write out 100, but when you go back, the value of that X, the one you passed in, is still going to be 10. Here, this is a different scenario where let's say you passed in a 10, since you're using ref, you're passing by reference. If you passed in a 10 here, you change it to 100. If you go where you, after this method executes, you go back where you called it from, the value of your X that you passed in is going to be 100, right? Here's a method returning a tuple, and as we stated, this is how you define it, and this is returning multiple. You can return multiple values, and in this case, you're returning a 10 and a 20, right? So that's about all I have for today. Next week we'll go over we'll look at some more examples on chapter 6 methods, and then because there's a lot of the labs for chapter 6 are pretty extensive, so we'll go through some examples of code for the chapter 6 labs. You know, please let me know if you have any questions about anything. But if not, I will. Actually, well, the rest of this week will be lab days. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need any help. And anybody have any questions about anything? Okay, well, I'll let you all go. And, like I said, please, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any problems with the understanding the hands-on test or understanding the labs for chapter 8. I can help you with that. So, all right, everybody have a good day.